Hi, I'm Brooklyn, and today I'm going to teach you how to do a quilt binding. Now, this is like one of the most essential things, and it's fun because it's the very last step before you finish your quilt. I'm going to demonstrate on this tiny quilt. It's a collage quilt. It was really fun to make, but the principle still applies. All of the things that I'm going to teach you are the same as you do on a bigger quilt, but it's going to be faster if we do it this way. So let's get started. So the first thing you need to do is take your quilt top, or your quilt. We've added the backing, the batting's in the middle, and we have our top. It's all quilted together and ready to add the binding. I have also cut right along the outside edge. If your quilt is pieced, you'll definitely know like exactly where to cut off excess batting and excess backing. Next, we need our fabric strips. So normally these are along the width of fabric, so they're a lot longer than these. But I cut this from a fat quarter because that's the color that I wanted to use, and I didn't need very much for this quilt. Once you have your width of fabric strips, we are going to line them up with wrong sides together, and I'm just gonna stack some here. We need to cut this at an angle. So I have a ruler. Most rulers, well, all rulers look different, but most of them will have a line here that's a 45-degree angle. You need to line that up so you can cut off a triangle off the end of your piece. This is gonna help our binding fold together nicely. So when we sew it, think about how many seams, how many times this gets folded. This will make maybe more sense as I show you, but so we sew it on and then we fold it and we fold it again. If your seam was completely straight here, if you skip this step, that fold is gonna be like 10 layers of fabric thick plus the thickness of your quilt, and that's like impossible to sew through. So cutting it at the angle really helps fix that problem. As soon as you have your triangle edge cut, your angled edge, this is my biggest tip and trick. This is the easiest way to do it, so pay attention here. I've lined this up here on this edge, and I am going to cut off a 1/4 inch off the tip. There we go. Okay. This little piece off the edge is gonna be huge in helping us line up these pieces and sew them together. It's kind of hard to tell on this fabric, but I'm putting right sides together and matching up where I trimmed that edge. So it should look like this. Then I'm gonna pin that in place. I'm just gonna sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on that edge. And with binding, you definitely wanna use coordinating thread. Now we have this set up into one long strip. I'm going to press these seams open and then we'll iron this in half. The next step is to fold this in half with right sides out and iron it. And you can do this whole strip just like this. I'm not sponsored by these guys or anything, and I don't have these in my shop yet, but this is the coolest tool for binding, so I'm just gonna show you. So once you iron that first little thing, this keeps it folded, and then you just place your iron on top and you can run it through like this. It is the fastest way to do binding. We do binding with our machine quilting, and this is how we do it. And we can do like king size binding so fast because these strips are long, and it makes it so easy to do this. And the silicone mat makes it so that it doesn't burn. You can leave your iron on as long as you need to. This thing is really cool. I have a link for that posted in the description because this is like the #1 binding tool. And then now your binding's all prepped. I'm just looking and making sure that everything is evenly folded. Like right there, it's not very even, so I'll just kind of reset it and press that down. The next thing we're gonna do is pin this on. So usually you want to sew your binding on the first time on the back so that when you wrap it around, you're gonna have your cleaner edge that you can see on the front. So they look clean on both sides, but I'll show you what I mean. We're gonna take this and pin it in place. So I kind of started in a random spot, but I just want to make sure that my seams are not going over my corners, or else it's going to get really chunky. And it might happen, but that's okay. The corner is a little bit more challenging than just the normal thing, so stay with me. We're going to go through this. First, you fold your binding out until you have a nice 45-degree angle here. If your iron's handy, you can press it, and that just helps you keep it nice and neat. You also want to line up this tip of the binding fabric right against the corner of your quilt. Then you just fold it over to go down the other side. Now I'm making sure that I have a nice angle here so that this folded edge that we just folded lines up evenly with the outside edge of the quilt. I'm going to pin that in place. And then when you're sewing it, you actually flip the pin so you don't sew the fold of fabric down. So I'll pin here, I'll pin on both parts here. Then you just continue down the line as you were on the other side. Doing this step of pinning the binding isn't something that everyone does, but pinning it is how you avoid stretching as you're sewing it. When you stretch your binding while you're sewing, it becomes smaller than the actual quilt, and that makes it so it gets like wavy when you're done. And to avoid that, you just have to add the pins. It's a pretty simple step. So here's the corner again. We're gonna take it out until this tip, this outside corner of the quilt lines up with this edge of the binding. We're gonna press it down and then fold back this way. So once you get to the end where you started, we're gonna just leave this alone for a minute. We're gonna come back to it. I just noticed that actually one of my seams lines up right here, and that's just gonna make another kind of chunky mess. So I'm gonna bring this back, and I'm just gonna cut this piece off before I have to deal with that. Okay, then I leave that gap open until I'm at the machine. So there's like, I don't know, probably 5 inches total here of extra. And I'm also going to switch to I'm gonna throw my walking foot on the ground. No, I'm gonna switch to a walking foot. If you don't have one or you're intimidated by it, that's okay. The normal foot will work fine, but this just makes it a little bit easier when you're going through so many layers. So I'm gonna deal with this joining after I have the rest of it sewn. So I'm gonna start like right here. And again, I'm just sewing with a 1/4 inch seam. Since I lined this up carefully with the edge of the quilt, then I can just sew with this seam and it will be like, it'll get everything all into one spot. You're also gonna wanna make sure that your needle is in a down position when it lands, so that when you're stitching, it will be easier to manage the corners especially. This should be pinned so that you can kind of move this flap. When we are going down this way, when we're coming to the corner, we want the flap to be pointed towards us. So the folded edge is on the side that we are not sewing on. And when you land about a 1/4 inch away from that edge, so where your seam would be, this is where needle in the down position is very helpful. You turn your quilt so that you're sewing along the edge of that flap. Then you lift your needle. I'll just clip it to show you what I'm doing a little bit clearer. Then we have our flap, we have this angle that we sewed right here. You fold it back the other way, pin it down, and then you just come off this just with a straight stitch. You don't have to do the angle again. And I'll just show you what that does really quick while we're here so you know why it's worth it. When you open this up, this is called a mitered corner, where it looks like it's folded in between, and it's just a really clean way to do it. So when we finish on the front, it's gonna look the same on front and back. And that's how you get like a perfect mitered corner, is you do those steps that I showed you here. I accidentally sewed, I just kept going there, and I forgot to do the angle stitch. So I'm gonna unpick just a little bit and go back because I want my mitered corner. So now we're to the point of joining this piece right here. I'm gonna, oh, that pin can actually stay. I'm gonna pull out this pin and this one. Now I have these two flaps, and this is the easiest way to do it. There's a million ways to do this, and there's some that my grandma taught me that I don't always take the time to do. So sorry, Grandma. So we're gonna take this flap here. It doesn't matter which one. I'm picking this side because the seam's already right here. So I'm picking this, and I am going to open it up and just fold part of it down. It's like a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch. It's pretty, just whatever you feel like doing. And then once it's like folded in, for some reason it's being really tricky right now. Once it's all folded in, then I just do a little finger press, which means I just slide my fingernails across that edge so it stays folded. It doesn't have to be very precise. Then I'm gonna take this piece and making sure it's like not too tight that you're like pulling your quilt, but just enough that it's still like secure across. And I'm going to tuck it in here. It's a little bit long to fit, so I'm gonna trim it down a bit. Okay, that's nice and neat. I'm gonna pin that down just because we want to make sure that that joint is secure so that it doesn't get loose, and then you'll get the weird wavy bumps. I'm gonna just sew over the top of this like I was. This I'm going to hit with a back stitch to make sure that I get up here. So most machines have a setting that you can just go backwards and then keep going forwards. Now your binding is attached, but we're not quite done. Make sure your pins are out so you're not gonna stab yourself. The last step is to flip the binding and secure it to the front. The easiest way to do it is with a zigzag stitch, because it's really simple to make sure that you're getting it all in and it looks really clean when it's done. But some people don't like the look of the zigzag stitch. So some other ways you can do it are, you line this up and make sure that your fold is always covering that line, or that it's lined up just right above it, so you're not seeing the binding seam in the front. I like to fold it just a little bit more than that to make sure that my binding feels full and that the quilt is all in there. Because when you do like not a lot, the binding feels kind of weirdly empty. Another way to do it that is my grandma's way, who is a very good quilter and who taught me how to do this stuff. I just take more shortcuts than she does. So again, maybe don't show her this video, I don't know. You can go in by hand and take a needle and thread and sew it to this. That is probably like my favorite look, but it takes way more time than doing on a machine. So I'm just gonna fold this over. Pinning isn't super important in this, but it's never gonna hurt you to pin. Well, if you stab yourself, it will hurt you a little bit, but it doesn't hurt to pin your quilt. Then when you get to the corner, it's kind of the same concept as before. Stretch this out so that it keeps going straight off the edge and pin that down. Then you're gonna bring this and fold it over to the front. And the biggest thing to watch out for to make that look clean is, sometimes it helps to fold down a couple inches too. The biggest thing you wanna watch for is that this corner that's on the first part and the second one that you folded over, that it meets up right there, that there's no weird gaps. That's probably the hardest part of the whole binding process, is making sure that the finished corner is clean and done. Once you have your binding set up, it's time to sew it down. So I'm most practiced with a zigzag stitch, making sure that my binding's secure on the top, but I'm gonna go with a straight stitch and we're gonna see how it goes. I am lining up my needle just like one thread length, like not very far at all away from that